Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Today's topics: Maine Democrats mobilize to campaign and choose a new U.S. Senate nominee to replace Graham Plattner. What's the process? Who's running? And how did they do in our debate? And a killing in Biddeford. Federal immigration agents fatally shoot an unarmed 25-year-old man from Colombia while he was driving his car. Who was he? How did this happen? We'll have reactions and calls for accountability and reform. My guests today are B.J. McCollister, a Democrat, a political consultant, a Maine delegate to the Democratic National Committee, and a member of the Democratic State Committee here in Maine. As well, we have Tom Saviello, a political independent, a former state legislator himself, and a former Republican and Democrat in his past. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
This week, I was pleased to co-moderate the new Center Maine debate among 8 candidates seeking to replace Graham Plattner as the Democratic U.S. Senate nominee who dropped out of the race 1 week ago. The first hour featured candidates who got 20% or more of the vote in the June 9th primaries: former CDC Director Nirav Shah, former State Senate President Troy Jackson, Secretary of State Saviello, who all ran for governor, you may remember, and former U.S. House Chief of Staff Jordan Wood, who ran for the 2nd Congressional District. Here are some highlights of what they said.
Well, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, what Graham talked about is something that I've been fighting for since I got into politics: healthcare, Medicare for all.
Voters are looking at you to see what is going on in Gaza, the genocide that Israel is committing, and the need to speak to that. And it's going to be difficult, but it is one thing that I took from Graham that I embrace that position now, but I learned it from him.
He's right. The democracy that we thought we had has been deeply corrupted by those in power in Washington, the billionaires and the massive corporations.
Can't hear? Nope.
Stop spending money on things that the billionaires and the massive corporations want, like endless war, and start spending money on the things that matter for folks at home.
To quit giving massive income tax cuts to people like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and start taxing wealthy people.
How many more people must die at the hands of Donald Trump's masked marauders before we finally agree that now is the time to abolish ICE?
Should have been body cameras on these agents, but there has to be real accountability and prosecution of those that break the law.
Nobody deserves to get shot and killed in the streets when their 3-year-old daughter is still in her pajamas.
I mean, that they need to be dismantled because they give us nothing in this country but heartache and racism.
So you're hearing there just a few of the topics, what they take away from Plattner's campaign, ranging to their arguments about ICE. BJ, these are your candidates. Obviously, you favor Troy Jackson. You've been working for him. You were his former chief of staff in the Senate. What's your takeaway from the debate?
Yeah, I mean, very clearly there are these 4 candidates who come out of the gate running because they had infrastructures in place. And I think when you look at where Plattner voters are likely to go, people who are excited about that progressive, populist, position and platform, they're likely to look at Troy Jackson, who had that platform well before Graham Plattner even arrived on the scene. I think as we go into the caucus, we can talk more about it, but this is going to be a game of who's the most organized and who can contact the most number of people to get them to vote this weekend and secure delegates.
So you're biased, of course, but on the merits, you see the ideological synergy from Plattner's supporters carrying over to Troy's. He's already announced the union endorsements rebooting, right?
Yeah, and I think you see it with even the campaign has rolled out, a slate of 100-plus former elected officials and elected officials who have endorsed him. The unions have come out in favor of him. A lot of the groups that were behind Plattner have said that they want to be behind Troy Jackson, too.
Well, Saviello has similar views, right, Tom? And Jordan Wood considers himself a progressive. Nirav Shah considers himself progressive, though he's seen maybe as more moderate in some ways.
So what I found interesting, as I told you, I had trouble watching this because we lost our power.
Well, that's why we ran the highlights.
Thank you. And I kind of went through it because one highlight that's really important to me that they all answered was Social Security. I'm on Social Security. It helps to hear that they want to maintain that. Somebody like BJ's and you, that's something you want to have in the future. Troy's answers were great. To me, they were right on the money. We need to increase the price where you pay, start paying for it, and we stop playing around with the retirement age. That was really important to me to hear.
In other words, don't raise it.
Don't raise it again. It's not fair to have somebody enter the workforce and say, you can retire when you're 66. Now it's 67, now it's 68. Now it's because of the way we spend our money. That's wrong.
And all 4 of those Democrats were first to scrap the cap, which means no longer capping the wage tax.
Wait,
In other words, right now when you earn $184,000, you don't pay taxes on that income above that. And they said that's all unfair. Wealthy are not paying on all of their earnings, and the rest of us are.
That's correct. I do have to give Rob Caldwell.
You agree with that?
I totally agree with that. I give Rob Caldwell a shout out because at some point Shenna was not answering the question, and he said, "Please answer the question."
Well, that's our job, right?
And that was good. I think it needs to be important because as you're trying to make these decisions between these four people, which I believe it's there, those people need to answer the questions, and I think they did a good job doing it. I think Rob Wood is a nice guy. I think Shaw and
Jordan Wood.
Shaw and Jackson did a great job answering the questions. Shenna, I don't know, couldn't follow her with what was going on. Interestingly enough, not one of them directly connected themselves to Plattner. They connected to his ideas and his ideals. If you watch the last four in the debate, every one of them tried to hang on to Plattner as the reason why they were running, which I found really interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned the last four because they were the focus of hour two of our debate. For other candidates, some of the earliest filers of Declaration of Candidacy, that included David Costello, who placed third in the Senate primary behind Plattner and Janet Mills with 8%. Maine Beer Company co-founder Dan Kleban making his first run for office. Former state representative Lizzie Dickerson, who hasn't been seen in some years, and a political newcomer, Ashley Webb. One policy question we asked about was gun safety.
I do think there is room for common sense gun reforms, universal background checks, closing down the gun show loophole.
I think a national red flag law would probably be more appropriate. If you're a danger to society, you shouldn't have a gun.
But I certainly support red flag. I support universal background checks. I support holding gun manufacturers accountable.
We have to do it because people are going to continue to die.
So to explain why those four were there, our station set a deadline of Tuesday, end of business. The party's deadline was Wednesday, and four other people submitted, so now we have 12. What'd you make of this group? Maybe no one thinks they'll be the nominee, but they were very refreshing to hear, weren't they, BJ?
Yeah, I think the analysis right after was spot on. It was more like a conversation of regular people talking about politics. You know, obviously the first block you had people who had, really done this type of thing a lot. And the second block you just had people who were there because they wanted to put themselves forward. I will say that Dan Kleban, definitely someone who should be considered a rising star within Democratic politics. I don't think there's any way he can develop an infrastructure to win in this election, but I do hope he runs for office again in the future.
And David Costello's run a couple times, only got 8%, got 11% in 2024 against Angus King.
I was surprised at his conversation. I expected more from him because he had been around longer, just as you've described. I expected him to have more, how do I describe it? More realistic answers. I mean, I did find it refreshing listening to them, and I had a smile on my face saying, well, these guys are brand new. They really haven't served in any real position before, so they've never been put in this place. But I thought they should have done a little bit more homework. That's what my feeling of coming out of it.
But this is partly what the party wanted by design after Graham flamed out, and he even called for a more open, transparent process, which means we get people who aren't the same old, like the first four, right, BJ?
Yeah, I think that the Maine Democratic Party was handed almost an impossible task here, and they deserve a lot of credit for creating a system that is as open as possible so people can all take part. And I think part of that comes from learning a lesson from the process that happened when Kamala Harris was replaced on the ballot. This process is open. Anyone can run. Anyone can run to be a delegate. There'll be a convention. They've done a lot of work to open this up.
And good luck. They'll have 100 days, less than Kamala Harris, to take on Susan Collins.
And I agree with BJ. I think no matter what happens, they're going to be criticized. But I think they've really tried to do this in the time frame they have, because they can't do another primary. But the time frame they've had, the only thing I shared with BJ before, it would be really good as they're picking the delegates, because they got like 5,000 people that have applied for it. What are the criteria? What are the criteria? And second thing that I would suggest to them, not being a Democrat, not being involved in this, be careful how you deal with Plattner's people. They could be disruptive. But the one thing that's always true about the Democrats, no matter who they pick at the candidate, at the end of the day, they all vote for that Democrat, whereas the Republicans do not.
Thank you. This is a good transition, because when we come back after this break, you've seen the candidates. So next we'll focus in on that process for choosing one to face Senator Collins in November. This weekend, Maine Democrats are convening 16 county meetings to choose 500 delegates who will join 101 state Democratic committee members in choosing the Plattner replacement at a convention in Bangor on Saturday, July 25th. 12 candidates have qualified for consideration. More than 11,000 Democrats have signed up to attend these conventions. Approximately 3,700 are running for a delegate slot. This group of 601 delegates is roughly a third of the number of Democratic regulars tapped to attend the official convention that occurred just 6 weeks ago in Portland, where official business was transacted and all the major candidates for Senate, governor, and Congress spoke. My questions are, why are Democrats reinventing the wheel, and whose interests are being served? Well, BJ, why don't you start us off on some of those answers as a member of the committee? You helped shape some of these rules or were part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the Maine law is very clear that the party sets the rules for how a replacement happens. You know, normally if there was a legislative candidate who dropped out of a race, there's a replacement process that is a caucus of the towns that might be represented. This is that just on a much larger scale. To be clear, the party could have made the decision that they were going to select a replacement by just the chair of the party or just the executive director of the party, but they didn't choose to do that. They decided, hey, let's make sure we've got 16 counties, people can attend the caucuses the same way they do when you replace a legislative candidate, and then we'll elect them to a convention so that we can select a candidate.
But anyone could just register to be a delegate? And by the way, the odds, 3,700, 500, I mean, that's a 1 in 7, not even a 1 in 7 chance.
Yeah, I mean, that's how a process works generally in a caucus. Anyone can say, I want to run as a delegate in a caucus. That's how it works when we did presidential caucuses. What I would say is what you see from those delegates is where the grassroots are. And what on the website of the party, everyone had a chance to put a statement on why they were running. And almost 2-to-1, Jackson to Shaw, people are mentioning Troy Jackson. Troy Jackson is hands down the person that the progressive energy is behind in this.
And one more question before I want Tom to weigh in. How come all of these big meetings aren't in person? Like the Cumberland County one, 149 delegates, is going to be remote. Penobscot County, 44 delegates, remote. Same as Androscoggin County. Kennebec and York will be at least in person. Those are the top 5. How do you have a meeting of over 1,000 people over Zoom when you need to press the flesh and say, hi, how are you, and get a feel for people?
Yeah, I think it does present a challenge for the candidates who are running because they have to figure out a way to talk to these people who are voting in a very short amount of time. I think you have to remember that these are county party committees. These are not big infrastructure, big budget organizations. And so for a county like Cumberland, who's going to expect thousands of people to turn out, even the logistics of getting space, the logistics of making sure that you've got a system in place, they just don't have budget for that type of thing. And by going online, there's an opportunity for everyone to participate. I actually think the challenge comes more for the candidates than the participants.
In terms of not being able to press the flesh. Tom, what's your view? You're not going to be involved?
Not going to be involved. I'm not running for candidate. I'm not changing parties to go back and be part of it. It's just not happening.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, BJ. But, you know, to me, no matter what they do, as I said a minute ago, they're going to be criticized. I think the fact that they're going to online involvement so that people can participate, that brings more people into the conversation. How are they going to manage 1,000 people on a Zoom call? I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter. They've opened it up so this can happen. They're using the technology for that to take place. That's so important. As I said in the beginning, no matter what they do, they're going to be criticized. But I give them great credit for, as an outsider watching this, in the communication to the public. This is what we're going to do. It's, as you said, they could have simply said, oh, we're going to pick BJ, he's going to be our candidate, thank you very much. Just like they did the coronation of Kamala Harris. They coronated her as the queen. She went on, and we all know what happened because of that. They're trying to do it as best they can. I give them credit for it. Am I going to be involved? Nope, I'm going to be at camp.
Well, Paige Lauder was the 13th candidate, briefly withdrew with a statement. She complained about this political chess game. That might be occurring in any normal year, but she also called what you've set up as an unserious spectacle. How do you respond to that?
I don't think that there's any other way that a system could have been set up in 2 weeks that is as open as this system is. There's no way the Democratic Party could have stood up with voting centers around the state one. And number two, the guidance from the Secretary of State's office was that they weren't able to bring in new registrants to this process. That's not the Maine Democratic Party. That's the Secretary of State's office. So not only could the party not pull something off like that, even the state infrastructure couldn't pull something off like that.
But independents like Tom can't participate like they could in the primary on June 9th. Isn't that inconsistent?
I think that if you ask people at the party, they would have loved to open the door for people to absolutely participate in this and register same day if they wanted. The Secretary of State office told them they couldn't.
And you're right. I, as an independent, I actually did vote in the Democratic primary because I made some promises to some of the primary candidates, including Mr. Jackson, which I took a picture of my ballot to show him I voted for him because I promised they would. Troy and I are friends from a long time ago.
Sure.
We have total disagreement on political things, but we are friends, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But I don't understand what her complaint is. They've tried to do the best they can do with what they have as a time constraint. As an independent, yeah, I would have liked to have been said, just find some way to bring their voice in there because we help put these people in these positions as 1, 2, and 3 if we voted down ranked choice voting. So they should have been incorporated, but you don't have time to do that. Something that probably has to be talked about in the future so that there's some kind of plan.
Speaking of ranked choice voting, at the convention, it won't be ranked choice voting. I'm calling it ranked choice voting light, where the bottom finisher gets thrown out, reset, vote again, and over to the final two. Is that right? And why not pure ranked choice voting?
That is correct. And I think that the reason is because the party can't afford to have this 1 week or 2 week delay to figure out who the ultimate nominee is. As we talked about earlier, this is going to be a sprint. And so, this helps accomplish that goal just in a light way.
You couldn't borrow a computer from the Secretary of State to tabulate? No?
So I call
Last
it
word.
the Pope-Popette vote because we'll be watching for what color the smoke is after each election.
You're going to burn the ballots?
I'll be ready.
White and black. That would be good TV. All right, when we come back, we're going to turn to the other major story of this week, an ICE killing in Biddeford. Around 7 a.m. on Monday morning in Biddeford, a federal agent for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, fatally shot into a vehicle being driven by a 25-year-old Colombian immigrant with a legal work permit and Social Security card, both issued by the Trump administration. The man killed was Johann Sebastian Duran Guerrero. He'd reportedly been in the U.S. for 3 years, never accused of a crime, worked 2 jobs for national corporations, cleaning a veterinary clinic and as a food delivery driver. On Thursday, his partner, the mother of their 3-year-old daughter, spoke out publicly for the first time, flanked by Mr. Guerrero's sister. You'll hear an excerpt of her remarks, very emotional, first in Spanish and then in English translation.
Siempre trabajaba para su gordita. Como le decía, nunca le faltó nada. Siempre quería estar en cada paso que su gordita. Salían juntos todas las tardes al parque. Llegaba mi niña feliz a contarme todo lo que papi le dio. Recuerdo que siempre la miraba y decía, está muy grande y hermosa. Y se le salían las lágrimas. Él vivía por ella. Todo lo que él hacía era en nombre de su gordita.
He always worked so that his gordita, as he called her, would never go without. He wanted to be there for every step his gordita took. They went to the park together every afternoon, and my little girl would come home happy, smiling to tell me everything that Papa had given her. I remember he would always look at her and say, "She's getting so big and beautiful," and the tears would come to his eyes. He lived for her. Everything he did in the name of his gorda.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security said ICE agents have been monitoring what they believe to be the residence of someone who was in the country illegally and had a removal order. We don't know many of the facts now under investigation, but this was the second such ICE killing in a week's time after a similar fatal shooting in Houston. This was at least the 27th ICE shooting since President Trump returned to office, according to the Gun Violence Data Hub, and the 11th fatal one, according to The Guardian. Protests came fast. Governor Mills and Senate candidates weighed in, some calling for ICE to be abolished.
How can you let ICE be funded in the aggregate more than all other federal law enforcement agencies, to the tune of another $70 billion this spring? without imposing controls, restrictions, accountability measures, without requiring certain conduct. We know in Maine what good law enforcement looks like.
Senator Collins has funded the abuses, she has confirmed the leaders, and she has refused to make them answer for anything and failed to impose safeguards.
Campaign Communications Director Blake Kernan told us it's unfortunate that Dr. Shaw is using a tragedy to further his political agenda. It's important we improve ICE's performance, and that is why new protections Senator Collins negotiated in the Department of Homeland Security funding process became law in April, including $20 million for expanded use of body-worn cameras, $2 million for de-escalation training, and a 17% increase in the Independent Office of Inspector General's budget to investigate matters such as this shooting. Anyone calling for abolishing ICE is calling for the agency to cease critical efforts to combat human trafficking, child exploitation, forced labor, and international drug smuggling. Well, Tom Saviello, what's your reaction to all of this?
First, and probably most importantly, in my notes is say I want to offer my condolences to the family. The shooting should have never happened. Never happened. This young man was an American trying to make a difference for his family and ultimately in his life, and that's very troubling to me. When I started going through this, as you asked me to prepare, I started looking, well, what is the training performance? What's the difference between the two? Because I found it unusual that Todd Lyon says that they had 200,000 applicants for these jobs.
Todd Lyon is the head of ICE.
Head of ICE. Yet we in Maine struggle to get people to apply to be police officers. So who are these 200,000? Are they the people that we have said you don't quite measure up to us? Then I looked into the training. They go through a 50-day training for law enforcement. Our state troopers or our police officers have to go through 18 weeks or 90 days of training before they are able to go on the street as a licensed officer that are there. Are there sign-on bonuses? Well, there's a sign-on bonus, but then they're given quotas of how many people they have to round up during the day. That doesn't seem right to me. And then the qualifications, are they the same as our troopers? Are they different? That I couldn't quite decipher, but basically what I could tell is that you have to be a veteran, or should be a veteran, and has some Pierce experience. My problem as I look at this is sometimes there's a shoot first mentality, and has the training changed? And why were these officers or these enforcement people out there without their cameras? That was one of the biggest conversations that took place in Congress before they approved that. You will have cameras, or they're on order. You know, people need to realize that ICE is under inspection all the time. They're watching very carefully. So people wondered why there was such a response to it, a visual response, at the time that it happens, because they were all waiting, praying that nothing like this would happen, and it did. We're under a microscope. You know, I think Janet Mills said it best. It needs to be reined in, fundamentally reformed, and if not, abolished. And I think even Troy said that, and Shaw said that in their conversations there. One thing that's sad to me is that Janet Mills, who is my friend, or a friend of me, she was booed when she went down to Biddeford. That's totally inappropriate. We're in a very sad situation. You don't boo somebody that's trying to pay their condolences to that. But those are my thoughts.
BJ?
You know, I absolutely echo what Tom said. You know, Mr. Guerrero was a father in his mid-20s, and I myself am someone who just had a child 2 months ago. And to think that because of where I live, that I don't have a neighbor that necessarily ICE is coming after because I look the way I look, that I would not be that I don't have to worry about being a target. That just to me makes me sick to my stomach. And I think when you look at what's happened with ICE, I mean, Tom just laid it out very well. These folks are not very well trained. But when you see the Collins spokespeople say, don't make this political. I mean, Susan Collins said she was the one who got ICE out of Maine when they were here earlier.
In January, the surge. Yeah.
Correct. Susan Collins was the one who helped appropriate this funding. Susan Collins was the one who gave us a guarantee that there would be body cameras. None of these things are better placed at a doorstep than at Susan Collins' doorstep. She's responsible for the ICE presence. She's responsible for the ICE funding. She promised us oversight. She didn't give us oversight. Susan Collins cannot avoid this.
But she also made the call to the new Homeland Security Secretary, Mark Wayne Mullen, to pause these traffic stops. She called him 3 times, and lo and behold, that seems to have happened. Now, President Trump has said, don't let it happen.
Yeah.
But what about that, Tom?
That's what, yes, she may have called for it, but Trump has overruled her. I mean, that was clearly out there the next day. But one of the things I asked some of my friends that are police officers and those that have come from out of state, some of the training they had, and one of the things they told me is you never block a car that's trying to escape with your body. Think about it. Who's going to win every time? So perhaps this officer reacted to a car driving at him. Why are you blocking the car with your body? What does your training tell you? These guys that have told me they trained, you block it with a vehicle or you put a pad down with the spikes in it, but you don't shoot at it. That's what was wrong. This guy was, and make sure if you're going to do something where you're going to try to stop something, make sure you got the right person too. It's scary to me. It goes on, and BJ's right. I mean, I'm a person who fortunately doesn't meet the criteria, but I have neighbors and so forth that are very concerned about this.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, how might ICE be reformed? The ICE agent who killed a Colombian immigrant in Biddeford this week has been identified as a former Maine law enforcement officer named David Brulliette, 37 years old, an Army veteran and a former police officer for the Veterans Administration. That's according to the Associated Press and other news outlets. His ex-wife, Ashley Brulliette, said David called her and admitted he was the agent.
I didn't realize that he was actually working for ICE until yesterday, and I was completely shocked because I'm like, how do you keep getting into these jobs where you're around guns all the time? He's like, well, I need you to lie about my character because this is how, this is what it comes down to is my character. I don't want you talking about any of the abuse in our relationship. This is literally about me, Ashley.
Of course, everyone in America is innocent until proven guilty, and there'll be justifications, and police do get a lot of leeway in these fatal shootings if they feel they were in danger, which is preliminarily what we've heard from ICE. Let's talk, though, about other reforms. We talked in the last session about training, Tom. You brought up a lot of good points about that. BJ, what are some other reforms that Democrats have been demanding, did demand, but didn't really get in both the $90 billion annual Department of Homeland Security appropriation that passed earlier this winter, spring, and then there was this additional $70 billion, which fully funds ICE till the end of the Trump administration?
Yeah, there were some pretty simple common sense reforms that Democrats asked for when Susan Collins advanced the budget bill and didn't take those requests into account. And those included requirement of body cameras. Those included not wearing face masks. Those included requirement for warrants. There are a lot of common sense
judicial
reforms.
warrants, by the way, not these administrative warrants that ICE issues to itself. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, these are common sense reforms that poll after poll shows that the majority of Americans agree with. I think at some point you have to look at the agency and ask if it is up for the job. I think Senator Collins in her statement has talked about how the agency does other important work. That important work can live somewhere else. If this is an agency that is going to put rogue agents on the street that are not having proper training and are making phone calls like the one we just heard about, I'm not sure it's the right home for everything else either.
I would agree. I mean, I think about this, as I said before, what's the training requirement? What do you do in 50 days that we do in 90 days? That's 40-day difference. Some of those things may be dealing with mental health issues, but why do we have such a thin pool of officers to go through? It's because when we do the analysis and the background checks, we find out there's issues, and those issues drop those people out. It doesn't sound like they do that.
What about a policy of not shooting into moving vehicles? Isn't that standard in most police departments?
That's what I would think. Like I said at the beginning, sometimes I think there's a shoot first mentality. But I'm not an police officer, so I've never wanted to be one, and I don't want to put myself in a position. I don't carry. I could carry if I wanted. I don't, because if you carry, you have to be willing to use the weapon. Sure. But when you put yourself in front of a vehicle, what do you expect? And they're going to react to it thinking, even if the guy is just simply trying to drive to the side of the parking lot. I don't know. We have no video camera to go through this particular picture. We don't know what the band did. But at the end of the day, training, do the background checks that are appropriate, take the time. If you're going to maintain ISIS, then reform it and make sure it's done right. If not, get rid of it and put something else in place that has a proper training program.
The shooting into vehicle also happened in the Houston case that I mentioned, and everyone remembers Renee Good in Minnesota, a bystander trying to leave. BJ, what about the idea of uniforms and badges? Maybe they should have sirens on their vehicles, so when you're chasing someone to pull him over or apprehend him, the person who's being chased knows it's a law enforcement officer and not, I don't know, a random criminal? What about those kinds of reforms?
Also included in a long list of requests that Democrats made in the last budget bill. And when you think about the fact that we were told, oh, we don't need to mandate the body cameras because those are coming, and there wasn't a body camera. There is no guarantee until something is actually required in law. And that, in my eyes, would require Susan Collins do something to actually legislate. Let's just step back for a second and be perfectly clear. There is a family without a father, somebody who was murdered, who is in his mid-20s with a little girl and a wife at home, who was here legally. And that family now has to live life without him.
And Tom, last word for you. President Trump apparently has a quota now of 2,000 arrests a day for this really high target in the millions of deportations. What's wrong with that?
You aren't doing your homework. You know, how do we know that there are 2,000 out? That's what he's telling us. I don't know how many are out there. But the most important thing is someone did lose their life. Do it right if you're going to do it. I mean, he was elected to do this. That was part of his platform. So he's carrying through what he said he was going to do. But do it right. Make sure the people are trained properly, that they have the proper equipment to do that. Otherwise, don't do it.
Tom Saviello, BJ McCollister, thanks for being my guests on Political Brew this week, and thanks to all of you for watching.